Now, the one thing about, to further going with, vector files and Illustrator and AutoCAD is that we don't always use Illustrator and AutoCAD and Photoshop in traditional ways, okay? We always tend to use them interchangeably. So what I want to show you is I want to show you two different ways that you can actually use Photoshop in order to create vector files that you can bring either into Illustrator or into AutoCAD. And I'm going to show you a project that I did using one of those methods. So the first method is that right now I'm in Photoshop. You'll notice it looks a lot like Illustrator, and that's because they're developed to look the same. Okay, again, it was that continuity in the Adobe programs that I mentioned before. And if I use the pen tool, okay, and it works the exact same way that it does in Illustrator, I can start to create a bunch of points. Okay, so essentially I could have something, I could trace over it. There are additional options for it. Okay, so you can actually make line drawings that are pretty smooth. But once you're done with it, what you can do is you can go to File and Export, and you can go Paths to Illustrator. And so if I select that, I can actually export those paths, say OK, save it where you can find it. And then if I open up Illustrator, I can see the paths here. Now you can't see them because basically they have a white line, or a none line, I guess you could say. So if I give a color to it, you can see that now they're paths, and they're actual paths that we can work with in Illustrator. Okay, so you can see I can stretch it, and I can work with it like any line in Illustrator. So that's one of the newer features that Photoshop has built into its program, in that it recognizes the need to maybe introduce, something to do with vectors. Okay, it still is a raster-based program. It still works by manipulating pixels. But this new feature has allowed you now to be able to create vectors and for it to export vectors. Now, what I did, okay, and I was working on a project. It was actually a gift for somebody. I actually took custom swatches. So you don't have to use these swatches that, and by swatches I mean, you can have custom brushes, you can have custom swatches, that's another thing, you can have stamps and everything. Basically when you work with Photoshop you get these predefined ones, okay, and this is actually a custom brush. So what I did is I loaded some custom brushes and I started to create layers upon layers upon layers that would essentially make a clock that I was going to have laser cut. So this is just an image, okay, of those brushes that are layered on top of each other. So this is basically a raster file. Now, one of the features in Illustrator is that if I click out of this, you'll see that now it's a line drawing, okay, again with those vectors. And that was basically done through this feature called Live Trace. And essentially, if I open up a new file, okay, and bring an image into it, okay, when I select it, what pops up above is this image trace. Okay, it used to be called Live Trace, now it's image trace. And I can look at the tracing options that are there for me. Now, it's not perfect, okay? Again, it just depends on the type of image that it is. It depends on, how the quality, okay, of the image, because, it can start to look like a blob or something like that. So you'll see that that's, line art. I can go into image trace and I can select the tracing result, although if you don't like that and you want to adjust it at all, there's this little tiny icon that is the panel, and this allows you to change it. So I can change the color of it, I can change the preset of it, okay, and I can change essentially what, maybe if I have a line art, okay, how, what are essentially, what's the threshold of it, Okay, so sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Okay, the threshold, you can start to play around with that. And then once you actually have it, then you expand it, and what that does is expand it into paths that you can use. Okay, so that's essentially the image trace. And as I said, it gets a little bit picky with the quality of the image. You know, obviously that wasn't a good quality image. It was actually a small image, and since I scaled it up, it made the quality worse. However, you know, you can start to do some of that line art on top of it. Now, in the end, this was the result that I came up with, okay, when I did that image trace. And then I actually set it up on a sheet in order to get it laser cut, which you can actually do either in Illustrator or in AutoCAD. And in the result, and this is about 5 layers of it, was this. So this I turned into a clock, and all of this I did from Photoshop and Illustrator.